Hello, for those who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Eyre. I'm sort of within the engineering sector, primarily in research, focused more on the visualization, but C# sort of the main language I use with it. Just as sort of a premise, I learnt C# through Unity, so some of the things I'm going to speak about is what you might find as common C# knowledge, might have more experience within that realm than what I'm about to say. So just a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about. What is Unity 3D? So show of hands, who's heard of Unity 3D? Who's used it? Quite a few? Okay. More than I was expecting. And then sort of a brief introduction to how it's different. So if you was about to approach on sort of a more visualization heavy project, what are the main things to look after? So what is Unity? It's a rendering engine for primarily the heavy visualization, but another name is sort of game engines. So if you've come across Unreal before, Lumberyard, they're all sort of within sort of the same region. You can develop both 2D and 3D, so it's not just these sort of environment-rich applications. You can do the 2D sort of side-scrolling puzzles, probably all played over the years. And it's got platform support for desktop, consoles, mobile, web, and it's all through the same C#. So you develop one C# set of code, and you just click redeploy if you want to for all 27 different platforms. And actually, sort of one of their main things is more games are made with Unity than any other gaming technology. The primary one, or the sort of the next common one, is people developing their own bespoke engines. So what's been happening recently? This is rendering in real time. So graphics have come a long way recently. And just so you don't have to take my word for it. So this is running off my laptop at the moment. So it can handle the visualization. You will notice the lighting dynamically changing as well. So this is baked from scans. So certainly if you're doing sort of more, as I say, model-rich scene, consider using what's already commercially available there as a visualization tool. I'll just hide that. And just for reference, if you want to look at it, that's from the Book of the Dead project. So I didn't make that. That is freely available for you to dig through the source code and see how they've done it. So you're thinking, oh great, it handles all the visuals. How different can it be? So what I'm going to say is, you're all aware of the amount of libraries available for C#. Most of them will plug straight into Unity. And if you know C# as sort of 99% probably of us here, I don't think you'll have any problems. There'll be a few nuances which I'm about to go through, but you should just be able to jump straight in. So first off, just so you don't get panicked about, oh, I won't be able to do it, you can still use your variables, you can still use your classes, you can still use all the OOP stuff that we've used all day to day. And don't forget, you can still tell your developers they can comment the code, so no excuses. So setup's a little bit different if you're approaching this for the first time. So there's no main loop. You create things within the scene and they all sort of control their own characteristics. So you actually have things like void start, void update. So start being before your game sort of is loading, this is all the code that runs, and then update is happening every frame. The idea being to minimize as many updates as you can. So you create a level where you create your game object, so things that appear in the scene. And within those scenes, you create components on the game objects. So think of these more like classes. So if you have a class of sort of a car, you might include classes such as the characteristics of the car. Does it need AI pathfinding? That might be another component. And these can be built in, such as enabling the physics engine, or these could be custom components, so develop your own A-star pathfinding system. You could put that on top. And as I said, they're all processed when the scene starts to run, so they can all get the connections to each other, and then it'll start to process as a real-time visualization. So the inspector, so because you're developing the code, sort of inheriting from one of Unity's classes, the way you then access the code is different. So one of the main things is through the inspector. So your public fields and variables, including enums, structs, and classes that you define, you visualize within the inspector. So here we've got Kevin doing quite a fast jog at 5 meters a second, and it's just the same C#. There's no additional wrappers here to say, yeah, put this in the inspector. It just handles that for you. And then in addition, when you enable debug mode, it also shows you private. They're just grayed out so you can't access them, but it means for debugging, when you're looking through in real time, you can see what your values have been set to. And other key areas is you might have one component called player, in this case just meta information, and you might have another component saying what's the enemy. So actually you could drag in a reference of your player to all the enemies so they knew where to target. And that's just done through the inspectors rather than having to say gameObject.find within the code. So coming back to the sort of the commenting, yes, you can use standard C#, sort of double slash, but actually there's other ways to now comment your code, which becomes a bit more readable. So using the same class, you could have now headers. So okay, normally you'd split it up into different components, so they are separate, so you can have modular code. But if you do have separate sections, sort of general information and some stats, you could separate them out. You can have tooltips. So just as you hover over something, as a developer, as a programmer, you're developing components for sort of game or level designers to use. So why not give them more information than just perhaps a variable name where you want to try and keep it as short as possible? So these are all sort of headers, spaces, tooltips, and all these, because we all love some C# code, is just one line above. So threading asynchronous is always sort of a tricky one in Unity. So yes, it's still available, and it might work perfectly fine in the editor. But if you're deploying, such as the HoloLens, which strips it all the way back to UDP, you now have to program it from the ground up. So the thing is, fail often when you're running and deploying to different devices. Desktops, I've never had an issue with. Certainly some of the more AR and sort of mixed reality devices coming through, you might have a few more issues with. The other thing to bear in mind is if you're using asynchronous data and actually running a proper thread, it will arrive not on a frame. So you have to put it into a queue to then parse it on the next frame. That's one of the error message you get for that is really not pointing to that error at all. And if you are looking to do heavily threaded applications, there's something in beta at the moment called the C# job system. That handles a lot of the threading. So you just tell it which jobs you want it to run with a priority, and then it will actually handle all that threading for you. And there's something else coming out, just to point in mind. So you've seen sort of where the visuals are going, but in terms of lots of information being sort of presented to you. So I'm within the engineering sector. We have sort of whole shop floors being visualized. If you've got lots of rendering happening for all the different parts moving around, it can get quite heavy. So this is certainly something I'll be looking at. So it's common. It's one of the many architectural patterns that some people haven't come across if they're not used to the visualization. Actually, it's back in 1998. And it's, as I say, when you've got lots of the same object or lots of different systems working together, it's quite good. So it's still in beta, but it is available for testing if you're starting to go down this more visualization approach. So here, unfortunately you can't see because of the projector, but there's lots of little troops down here and sort of arrows flying around. So if I load up this and drag it across, so you'll see lots of people being controlled. This is all from the entity component system. About a year ago, this would just not have been possible. So that's basically it. Kevin says, always come and do a rant, so I came and did a rant. So, brief introduction to Unity 3D, for those which aren't aware, and then just some of the more areas to look out for if you're going to start programming in Unity 3D. So, yeah, thank you very much.